Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Banking on Experience. I'm your host, James Gilbert. Today's episode is really near and dear to my heart, and I love this guest. She's a fantastic person and human being. But we're going to be talking about journey mapping today and how important that is. So stay tuned. Super excited about this one. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners that continue to subscribe to the podcast. Today we are joined by Annette Franz. Annette, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be a great conversation. This is not my only conversation I can have, but I love talking about journey mapping. So awesome. Thank you.
Annette is the queen of what I would call like how journey mapping very first started. She's written lots of different materials about it, but you've also written a pretty recent book. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I do. And before I talk about my book, I want to talk about very quickly the history of journey mapping. I learned that it came about like in the late 1980s. And there's a book that talks, and it's nothing like journey mapping today or what we talk about today, but that's when the concept was first introduced, was in the late 80s. So very cool. So yes, thank you. My book is called Customer Understanding: 3 Ways to Put the Customer in Customer Experience and at the Heart of Your Business. And it's about those 3 ways, right? But the last maybe third of it is how to conduct your own journey mapping workshops, journey mapping, service blueprinting workshops. So I had a lot of fun writing it because it was just like there's so much stuff in my head that I just want to pour out into it.
I love it. So I got to ask you kind of a fun question that I'm going to start asking our guests from now on.
Am I the first one to get this question?
You are the first one.
Okay.
If there was something that lots of people in the customer experience world believed and you completely disagree with it, meaning you're very passionate about the opposite side of that argument, what would that be?
This is going to be probably a scathing response, but I'm going to have to go out on the ledge here and say it's NPS, Net Promoter Score. That is my, it elicits sort of that gut reaction, because it's one question. There's so many things, right? There's so many things about it. And I'm talking about NPS, not NPS 2.0, when they suddenly realized, oh, shoot, we actually just drove the opposite behavior of what we wanted to have here, getting people to focus on this one number, and that was it, right? Versus NPS 2.0, which is about the system and what you do with the feedback and everything. So when people talk about NPS as the holy grail, it just makes my skin crawl because it may not be the right metric for every industry or every company. It is just one number. People focus on that number. And as I like to say, when you focus on doing what it takes to move the needle, then you do things differently and you do different things than when you focus on what it takes to improve the experience, which is ultimately what's going to move the needle. So those are sort of my 2 big beefs. I've got more, but those are my 2 big beefs.
I actually really like the fact you mentioned this. I did not know you were going to mention this. This is funny because the other day I was on a call with a bunch of CMOs, and they were talking about how to measure their brand, how to measure like what people perceive of your brand. And almost all of them were sitting there talking about, oh yeah, like we do a brand pulse survey and it's almost like an NPS metric. And I just was like, what? Hold the phone. Like that's how you measure how your brand is being perceived? I guarantee you that's not how it's being perceived. You're right. It's one metric. And I think that there's a lesson here that a lot of the listeners can learn as well. And that's that experience, especially with your brand or any others, is multifaceted, multi-channel. And it's all over, which is why I actually really love talking about journey mapping, because I think that it helps people grasp that concept of how multi-channel it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Let's dive in here. What are some of the challenges that you think people have when it comes to just building journeys in general?
Oh boy, where to begin? The big one is why you're doing it, and do you have budget for the output of what you're doing, right? So first of all, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because everybody's doing it and I just got to check a box? And when you think about it in that way, you're doing it wrong, because ultimately what you're going to end up with is just a pretty picture on the wall, or it may not even be pretty, but you end up with just a picture on the wall, right? There's a whole process to it. And that's part of what I go through in the book, right? The whole process to make sure that it does become the catalyst for change that it needs to be. And you hear so much, oh, journey mapping, I got to do it. And then they do it. And then it's like, well, that was a waste of time. Now what? I think that's a really big problem. The other thing that, and I'll come back to the budget point in just a second, but the other thing is that they just don't know how to do it, right? You have to start with your personas. Different personas have different experiences. So you have to start with mapping by identifying the personas that you're going to map for. And another big problem is that they aren't actually journey mapping, because journey mapping, if you're going to be doing it and you're going to be doing it right, has to A, be done with the customer from the customer's perspective, and B, it has to capture what the customer is doing, thinking, and feeling. If it doesn't do any of that, then you ain't journey mapping, right? And I think what a lot of people do, and I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday who said, oh, that's what I'm doing. Touch point mapping is looking at the entire customer life cycle and capturing and inventorying all the touch points within each life cycle stage, right? And that's a huge undertaking, and it needs to be done too. But a lot of people think that that's journey mapping, and that's not journey mapping. And then I'll come back to the budget point real quickly. So people do journey mapping, but they don't have the budget or the commitment for resources to go and fix what needs to be fixed when they, uncover what's broken in the journey map. So that's a big problem. So again, then it becomes a waste of time, because you spent all this time and money, hopefully with customers and with your stakeholders, creating these maps, but that's where it stops. So just some of it. There's more. I think I have like a list of like 13 or 15, but I'll stop there.
I don't think I've even ever thought of it as the fact, like when you start doing a journey map, you also have to think about like, well, am I going to have budget to implement this at the very end? Because that is a very important point that you make. And I love the fact that you broke it out into the difference between a true journey map involving a customer and understanding from their eyes what really happens versus a touch point map. Because I think, like, just from a marketing perspective, marketers think they're doing a lot of journey mapping. Like, we're building out the buyer journey. Like, that's what we're doing. But it's not. It's really just building out the touch points. And I love the fact that you brought that up, because I think that's a good differentiation for the audience to learn from.
Absolutely.
We talked about the challenges that people face. Let's kind of shift this into financial institutions for just a second. You said that there's like 13 different things, right? I don't expect to go through all 13, but maybe give a high level framework of where people could start. Like, where can financial institutions come in and be like, you know what, we need to start mapping out our journey?
Yeah. So the 13 or 15 things were problems, mistakes, things that they were challenges that they were facing. But the steps there's really 6 steps. But here's where you can start, right? This is what gets people caught up in this whole thing too, is where do I start? If you have known pain points, because your frontline has told you, hey, this is a problem customers have been telling us, or if you've gotten feedback from customers that said, this is a known pain point, or if you have been able to identify, internally, these are some leakage points. This is where we're losing customers. We see that they're going through the website, but they're not making the purchase, or we see that they're calling, but we lose them here in the call queue, or in the, in that whole call tree, or just in that whole interaction, that whole experience. Those are places to start. Known pain points, I'll call it the low-hanging fruit, because they are known pain points, things that we can fix, is where we need to start when we're starting journey mapping. And so the 6-step process, that I have is really, the first step is plan, and that's where we identify the scope of the map, the point A to point B. We identify the personas that we'll be mapping for. We identify, our objectives and our success metrics and all that. Because just like any other project, we have to know why we're doing it and how we're going to measure that this has been a successful undertaking. And we have to identify who's going to be in the room. So we need to have customers in the room, and then we should have stakeholders in the room as well. And the stakeholders will sit and listen while the customers are mapping and doing the work. But the stakeholders don't necessarily have to just be, and I love to use this example of mapping a customer service interaction, because in that interaction, a lot of times people just want to bring in as the stakeholders, the customer service executives, but we need other folks in the room as well. So if we think about the most pervasive problems that customers call in about, maybe it's a product issue. So we should have also in the room marketing folks, product marketing, sales. And I like to say, marketing's messaging was off about the product and what the product was going to deliver, right? What the product was going to do for customers. Sales sold the dream. I always smile and laugh for that one. Product designed a faulty product, right? It's not doing what the customer thought it was going to do or expected it to do. Product marketing, maybe the documentation's off or they, whatever it is, right? So they need to hear that, because when they hear that, they can then take that information that customers are talking about during this mapping exercise and go back and fix it, right? Because when we start mapping, we'll start with what was the reason? How did you end up here, right? What was the need?
What about service and support? Do you feel like they should be a pivotal part of those discussions as well?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, those folks were in addition to the customer service executives. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave them out. But yeah, that's in addition to the service executives. Because if they can fix the problems upstream, if they can fix these things, imagine the impact on the call center and the reduction in the volume because the experience was designed properly. So this is where, when we talk about the definition of customer experience, right, and we differentiate between experience and service, this is where I love to bring in Chris Zane's definition, which is, and I've muddled it up since he made the quote, kind of adapted it to my own, but it's basically what he's saying is service is what happens when the experience breaks down, right? So get the experience right. Your service folks will love you because it'll take off some of the volume and the stress and the, all of that from them. And especially your customers will love you too. So that's the first step. That was just the first step, the plan.
Keep going. Let's go through it.
The second step is the actual workshop, right? Being in the room, mapping the current state, making sure you map what people are doing, thinking, and feeling. You can capture other things on that map, but those are the three main things you want to capture. You can also capture, what channel they're interacting with for each of their steps or using for each of the steps. You might capture the people they're interacting with, the documents or the systems. If it's a mortgage application, were they online? Was it a paper document? Did they get a FedEx package with their book of documents, that kind of thing. So we'll capture that along the journey as well. So that's what we're doing in the workshop is we're having the customers tell us all of these things. We may capture a timeline as well so that we have a real understanding from the customer's perspective, what was the experience and what were their expectations? Okay, so it took you 2 weeks to get the loan docs, but what was your experience, right? Well, the experience was that I thought I was going to have it in 3 days, like they said I was going to have it, kind of thing. So, those kinds of things. So that's step 2. Step 3 is identify. And during that step, what we do is we bring data into the maps so that we can bring the maps to life, so that we can add a bit more of a quantitative component to it. And then we'll use that data also to identify the moments of truth, those make or break moments in the experience where, either the customer is going to say, yeah, this is an awesome experience up to this point, I'm going to continue, or, oh my gosh, this is so painful. It's so frustrating. It's not worth it. I'm out. And then from there, the next step is, and I'm doing high level, so we don't talk about this for 3 hours, which we could, but the next step is introspect, which is all about building the service blueprint. And this is a piece that a lot of people, we talk about challenges and what people get wrong or what they're not doing right when it comes to journey mapping. Journey map is what the customer is doing here, right? Above the line, sort of what the customer is doing. Service blueprinting is what's, sort of surface to core. What's happening behind the scenes, the people, the tools, the systems, the processes that are facilitating and delivering the experience that the customer is having. And if something is broken there, we have to fix what's happening on the inside in order for the customer to have a better experience, quote unquote, on the outside. So service blueprint is a really important step there. Step 5 is to ideate, which is getting back together again with customers to ideate the ideal future experience, to map the future experience. And then step 6 is all about getting to work and prototype testing, failing fast, prototyping, testing until we got it right. And then we launch, we train our employees on the new experience, what they're expected to deliver. We communicate with the customers what the new experience is so that we can set expectations and all of that. So going back to our original talking points there, that, it's not just a picture. There's this whole process that has to be put in place so that you actually make the changes that you need to make as a result of doing this.
There's 2 things that I want to hit on really quick in relation to that. And that's the fact that, during this process, And during these workshops, you have other functions of the business that are pivotal to the outcome. Meaning you cannot do this alone as marketers. You cannot do this alone as customer experience professionals. You cannot do it alone as the contact center or service and support. You have to have the other functions of the business in there. And then the other area was, when we help people solve this in our technology, one of the things that we run into a lot is kind of an aha moment for them when they realize, holy smokes, like this is actually a direct, I would say, correlation or whatever you want to say to the employee experience. We often think journey mapping as customer, but what the outcome of that is a better employee experience too. Can we touch on that for a second? Like, I know this is one of your favorite topics to talk about, and it's one of mine too. So let's talk about it for a second. Why is it so important? And from the outcome of doing this exercise with journey mapping, what do you see with your clients?
Yeah. So let's go back to why it's important. And I'm excited because I'm here to tell you, and you're probably I've sort of talked to others about it, but I'm here to tell you that my second book is in the works, and it's all about employees and the employee experience. And I'm thinking about making it employee understanding as the title, but not sure yet. But that's a 2021. It's not coming this year, that's for sure. But that's a 2021 thing. But that's
exciting. I'm excited to read it.
Yes. So it ties very directly into what we're talking about here. So the employee experience, it's almost like it's a no-brainer, but it's taken. So I've been talking about this since I started my career in 1992 with JD Power and Associates, and I was not on the syndicated side of the work. I was on the proprietary and the custom research side of things. But I would always talk to my clients about we should listen to employees. There's this direct connection there. Because when employees are happy and engaged, they're productive, right? They're productive, and there's this thing called the spillover effect that, their happiness leads to employee or customer happiness. So, but I'll actually give you a very specific example, because this is what employees tell me. When I'm out starting with a client, I always start with interviewing the executive team, sampling of customers, and a sampling of employees. Employees tell me that they don't have the tools, the systems, the processes, the training, the resources, the workspace, the whatever it is they need. These are their words, to serve the customer as they deserve to be served, right? So employees come to work, they want to do a good job, but if we don't give them what they need to do their jobs and to do them well, then they can't serve their customers and the customer suffers, right? So it's straight from the mouths of babes, right? It is right there. They tell us why this is so important, why the employee experience is so important, and we need to focus on making sure they have what they need to do a great job.
And what's fascinating about you mentioning that is how relevant that became during the pandemic. Now everybody was moved home, and they were saying, okay, don't come into branches, but still do your job. But we're not going to give you any equipment to do your job, and you don't have an office to do your job. So good luck doing that, right? And I know I'm totally exaggerating, because I know that there's a lot of organizations out there that really did empower their employees with equipment and the right process, but we're seeing a shift, and it's not likely to end anytime soon, right? And so I think that one of the things that is also telling in all of this discussion is how it's changed during the pandemic, and how your journey maps and the process with your journey maps is different.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that for a second.
Well, and I just want to throw out something that I read, a couple months ago, which was some research. I forget who even did it, but it said, customers are more willing to buy during this pandemic from brands that are taking care of their employees. They don't want to buy from brands that aren't taking care of their employees, and I love that human side of this. I think we really are seeing a lot more of that this year. In terms of journey mapping, really the big thing that's changed is that we are doing it virtually, right? I mean, we can always do it virtually, but it's way more fun to do these workshops in person. But we're doing it virtually and adapting to that, and really spending a lot more time, I think, too, talking about how customers are feeling right now. We spend a lot more time talking about the emotions and that connection more than we have in the past. And I think that's really important. I think that we've learned a lot through this pandemic and through this crisis that has from both a personal and a professional perspective, has put things back into perspective for all of us. So, and it's brought the human back in a lot of ways as well.
It's funny how oftentimes we forget just to ask how people feel, including our customers and our employees. And we can't get away from that. That's innate to who we are and what makes us who we are. So, I mean, Annette, you've given a fantastic framework, high level. The last question that I have for you is really for the audience. And that's, if somebody needs help with this, or if they want to hire you for consulting, how do they reach you?
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So my website is cx-journey.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter. You can email me, Annette@cx-journey.com. So thank you. I appreciate that.
And if you are emailing us already and you need help here, we can also refer you to Annette, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for joining us. Annette Franz, everybody, she's fantastic. I look up to her a lot, and I look up to all of her frameworks. I use them often. So her books are great too, so I can't wait for the second one.